No, oh no, no. Oh, but it's just gonna be David's. So.
Yeah. And I'll just pop in and do a quick intro. Then I'll
Maybe you wanna.
takes off. I will live it. Everyone will only contact me.
Okay, and we're live. Shruti, you want to get us started?
Ah, okay. I am, yeah. I'm unmuted.
Yep.
Okay. You can see me?
Yep.
Okay. So, hi, I'll introduce myself again. So, my name is Shruti. I'm General Manager for Blockchain Center Singapore. So, Blockchain Center is a global nonprofit blockchain knowledge and community hub. Our broader vision is to improve the awareness and adoption of blockchain technology. We have a network of centers, so we are present in 16 countries or 16 cities around the world. And each city, we tend to do something slightly different. So in Singapore, we are broadly focused on improving the awareness through workshops and events around what blockchain technology is and its different applications in different industries. And on the community building side, we try to run events that will actually bring the community together, and we try to serve as a hub for the blockchain ecosystem in Singapore.
Thanks.
Thanks for putting together this event on kind of short notice. And I think it's nice that we could experiment with a new format. We kind of thought of putting together a really, a small group of people and stream out the conversations format that we're trying out. So feel free to leave your feedback on how this format's going.
Yeah.
For those who joined the live stream, if you have questions, you can probably see a Q&A section. So you can either drop your question there or in the chat section. Or if you have any feedback like audio dropping out or someone not looking good enough, please let us know. But thanks for joining in. Thanks to Shruti and the Blockchain Center. My name is Sid, and I'm part of an organization called Sacred Capital, building the foundations of what's known as the reputation economy. For those who are interested, we'll share some more links with you. There's also an AMA that the Holochain community is hosting for us on Thursday night Singapore time. I recommend joining that for more details about us. So I'm kind of going to lead straight into the conversation with David. I'm sure most of you on the stream know about him. He's the commercial director for Holo, and one of the, you could say, founding members of this project. He's someone who's, I would say, been an absolute joy to interact with, as part of Sacred Capital. To see him guiding, I would say, what's really a new economy in a sense. And so, thanks for joining us. Today's conversation, we're gonna keep it pretty high level, and by that I mean it's not so much about the technical details about Holochain. I think there's enough and more out there. But with the group of people here, we can dive into where Holochain really hits the road, how this might, how David visualizes this architecting society in a way, and what it might do for what we're now calling the distributed web. And from there, we'll kind of lead into mutual credit, reputation currencies, and how economic systems of the future might start panning out. And I think there's a lot to unpack there, especially as more and more people are asking for what's beyond crypto. So yeah, we're gonna dive into it. David, and maybe the first question is what I spoke about. A little bit about Holochain more in terms of how it contrasts to traditional blockchain-based approaches. I think most people here and listening have a pretty firm understanding of what blockchain platforms are like. And I think if you could just from your sense articulate what the sharp contrasts are, and and where we could see Holochain applications differ from what blockchain has been able to provide us.
Sure.
Yeah.
Thank you for the intro. Great to be here. At some stage, can we go?
I just removed myself.
Oh yeah.
At some stage,
Yeah.
maybe it's after the live stream finishes, but I want to talk about bubble tea.
Oh, yeah.
Because I swear I thought bubble tea was finished in the late 90s. And then every time I come, it's back.
Yeah, they didn't get
No. So I'd like to understand, but I don't know if Holochain will support an economic system that's powered by bubble tea or not.
At least you'll stay clear of bubbles.
Okay.
That's the
So how does Holochain differ from blockchain?
Yeah. If we were to articulate it maybe in just a few sentences.
Okay. I'll take a couple of angles here.
Yep.
So one way we know blockchains are public blockchains. So how does Holochain differ from a public blockchain? Holochain has no currency, and public blockchains require currency to power the blockchain because you need to incentivize the work or the staking or any of the other mechanisms to support a public blockchain. Holochain says this is basic infrastructure. It should be provided and available for free. You're going to be able to power a new web and all sorts of new forms of communication. So Holochain instead is a framework for building distributed applications that can build public or private networks. There's no overriding platform, which gives you advantages because Holochain transactions are always free. And it also supports governance at the application layer rather than at the platform layer. So that's really a fundamental difference is in the intent then, because Holochain is designed to build network of networks, pure peer-to-peer applications, public or private. From a private network perspective, why is Holochain different? It is also pretty useful to think about. So firstly, you can bridge from private to public networks in Holochain. Secondly, it's asynchronous. So you can run offline transactions, sync back. Thirdly, it's still always free. But the crux of the difference comes from the orientation. And it takes a little while to get your head around, but eventually, and especially it takes a little while to develop in this way. But when you get there, Holochain just says not everybody needs to know everything. And so instead of building the application or the network or platform based on organizing data in a ledger, in Holochain you orient around the agents or actors in the system. That's the fundamental difference, is trying to get to a version of the truth, single version, sharded version, whatever, versus you hold infinite versions of truth, and that needs to be supported and shared in different ways. That's the fundamental difference.
We're gonna try.
We're going to try and not speak at the same time because we're trying to switch our mics, which is why it'll seem a bit orchestrated, this conversation. But that's not the case. Maybe you could lead into, as an outsider, as an end user, as an entrepreneur, how do you think Holochain is going to shape applications, distributed web, the way we interact with each other. And so in that sense, how do you think it will start shifting our engagement with the internet, with each other online and maybe even offline?
Okay, great. You're asking me multifaceted questions. Okay, where are we gonna have to remind me at certain times, because there are about 4 or 5 ways we really can come at the different facets of your question. So how is Holochain going to change the way we communicate and collaborate? On Thursday, we'll see Phil Beadle, one of our core engineers, albeit hopefully it all goes well with the synchronization, but he's going to show how distributed self-sovereign identity that you can have with a Holochain application powers then a chat application. What we can see within that is we can see a world where something like chat is run by all of us in the room, is owned by all of us in the room, scales based on the compute power of all of us in the room, where we can be ourselves in different contexts. It could be our personal self, our work self, another self, but we are still someone, where we therefore build reputation that bridges the online world back into our offline world. And kind of when you look at it, it's just a chat application.
And it's, at the end of the day, it's just...
So, there's a lot of power when we start to see this bridging of self-sovereign identity into the communication, collaboration applications that we see on the web. And partly we start thinking about, well, how is this going to change things? Well, in one way it changes because you shift infrastructure costs. I'm always trying to look at how something just affects the top line or the bottom line, because we could be talking about all sorts of beautiful things in the world, but generally in business, you need to be able to talk about top line or bottom line. Generally, for people switching, you need to understand that they're experiencing a certain level of pain, and the alternative needs to be able to meet that pain threshold and transcend that pain threshold, so they will take the risk and try something new. All right. And so from a business perspective, being able to power infrastructure at scale, at close to zero cost, is something that's never happened in the world of computing. The opportunity when you're doing that to collaborate with your consumers, your users, your customers, because they are running the application that you're collectively powering, means that you build in economic transactions, you build into collaboration. Again, that's never happened. So we're in the web at the moment, we're trying to understand how to monetize activity. Whereas in a Holochain powered world, the base activity of providing compute power is recognized. It doesn't need to be rewarded because Holochain transactions are free, but it's recognized because you're all participants in this network. So you're starting from a transactional base where you could be building their reputation, you could be building all sorts of other activity. So there's a fundamental change. Infrastructure costs change, monetization and where transactions change, the bridging of your identity into activity changes, and then ownership fundamentally changes because you're free to own the world you're participating in. But all of it only relies on, from a retail perspective or consumer perspective, applications that Holochain offers solve a pain point that people have that force them to want to move or change. And from a B2B perspective, the kind of applications you can build on a holochain solve problems that no other technology can solve. And so there's big incentives to switch into those applications. And they're the key things for us to think about.
Thanks. I'm gonna, I led in with pretty macro general questions. I'm gonna get more specific now. You used the words collaboration. You used the words, different kinds of applications dealing with different motivations. How is this different from a Facebook saying we want to promote collaboration in the world? How is this different from the promise of the internet that we've seen over the last 10 years, where applications came in saying we want to connect the world and we'll be able to speak to each other? And is there a sense you can give us in terms of what these applications will start? Like, how will they start looking different and feeling different?
Let's just take the first part of the question, and then we'll come to the second part of the question. All right, so great question. How does it look different? Well, so Holochain isn't a business like Facebook, and it doesn't run a platform. And I know this, again, takes a little while to get your head around, because every other blockchain, like public blockchain that I know of, is a platform. But it's not. It's just a framework for building distributed applications. It's a scaffolding. It's like programming language. And the language says, like, there is no platform. There is no internet. This network of networks. So why is this different? Because when you don't own the platform, you try to build an ecosystem. You don't try and strengthen the platform. So think more like Linux. Linux powers most of the internet. The key for Linux is providing really high quality infrastructure and building an ecosystem. And so you're not trying to, when you're building a platform, your entire incentives are aligned to strengthening your platform. So something happens, Facebook grows in this way, then everyone cares about privacy. So what do? They put a whole bunch of ads all over all the airports in the world saying they care about privacy. It's nothing inherently good or bad. It's an organization doing what organizations are designed to do, which is strengthen their organization. That's their entire incentive base. That's what organizations are built for. That's how all their compensation works, etc. They're just doing what they're supposed to do. So if people want distributed applications, they're more likely over time to use a framework for building them than to use a platform. It just makes sense. It doesn't make sense to build on top of platforms, because the platform, 1, take transaction costs, 2, set governance rules, and 3, their incentives are to support the platform. So you're going to want an application framework. Then why is this different? Well, if we're all powering our application and they're interconnecting, then there's no one who tells you what you can do with C++, is there? You just do what you want. No one tells you what to do with Java. So there's no one who's going to tell you what to do with Holochain. It looks so similar, but it's a different world.
It's got the word chain in it. And I think that confuses people.
Whether it's got the word, do you know what? Maybe, but it bridges people a lot closer to what it's trying to do. Because when you say it's a framework for distributed applications, everyone smiles and says that's a succinct way of describing something I don't understand. Thank you so much, David. I still don't understand, but at least you were brief.
We can open it up to people.
We can open it out to people in the room if they've got any questions. Judy, you have a question? You have a question? Oh, no.
No, not yet.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I thought you looked at me like you had a question. David, do you want to share a bit about, from the answers that you just gave, there might be a few people, looking at this and saying, oh, this is like Linux. Is this, a fantastic hippie movement? Like, can we build businesses on this? Like, how do we start orchestrating and architecting our business? And I think that's there's a certain amount of confusion because you talk about no inherent currency embedded in Holochain. What does that mean? How are we going to incentivize different agents and stakeholders in our ecosystem? So what does that actually mean? And what does that mean for us as both entrepreneurs and users?
Okay, well, yeah, let's again take step by step. So, Linux powers most of the internet. So regardless of who built what, it seems like a pretty solid model. So I'd say the first thing that's worth considering is to say in the blockchain world, we say like, ledgers are great as a starting point, especially in the world of finance. So you can see the decentralized finance movement taking off, hear about some of the things you guys are doing, hear about, Nexo, some of these other businesses building solid businesses. And there's also no accident that some of the decentralized finance, decentralized fundraising through ICOs, IEOs, exchanges, etc. Something like a ledger is really, really solid in these environments. Ledger doesn't do the same job when we're thinking about building and scaling applications. When what really matters is who intended to do what and who is doing what. That matters much more than organizing a ledger. So where I see huge opportunities and where we get really, really open doors, supply chain, but in a very different way to blockchain. Supply chain, when you get organizations that realize that you can't build a single supply chain solution, what you want is immutable records of activity across the chains that are effectively modular building bricks. And someone does something somewhere, and someone else does something somewhere else, and someone else does somewhere else. And there's 3 private networks. But you do this here, and that also private network can bridge into those 3 sources. They can be validated, and bang, you got a supply chain solution. But you haven't done anything. You've just got 4 networks. And this is how supply chain is going to unfold. This is why Holochain, when we talk to people in the EU and people start thinking about the GDPR plus self-sovereign identity plus supply chain, you start to get the lights go, because you're just building applications that are their own private or public networks. Suddenly the power is when you bridge between them. And so you don't have to construct this ridiculous world from, the strawberry farm in the Netherlands somewhere into whatever Marks and Spencer in Singapore and the 40 billion steps in between. You just have a certification network there. You have a validation network there, a shipping network, a store network, bang, bang, bang. You can bypass it all. It's just building networks. Right? That's how it's going to unfold. So some things like supply chain, then you get into areas like disaster relief, disaster recovery. You really just want mesh network powered solutions where instead of telling people what they need, people can tell you what they're looking for. Really, really simple. Most important thing in the disaster world is what is needed from people who are suffering or struggling is not what you would expect. Yeah. Hey, we need more blankets. Mesh network, communication in, bridges in, get locations, deliver blankets. And aviation is the other one where I think aviation's perfect because IBM comes in, sells you a Hyperledger solution that's more expensive than client-server software now, has no net benefit to what people are doing today. They've seen it all before. Instead, if you get this software that can just build you a little network that doesn't have a smart contract, because smart contracts are way too limited for what you need to be able to do, it's just an application. So you write an application powered by a Holochain application that connects 5 different airlines, 5 different airports, and does dynamic landing fee settlements. Save $3 billion. But there's no fuss. They don't need to get a massive sales pitch from IBM. Doesn't need to cost $120 million. Doesn't need to cost $1 million. 4 people can build the solution. So there, when you get start to look around these different industries, what really excites me is people who built fantastic software before that want to build collaborative technology, that look around, think blockchain is going to solve the problem. And apparently it doesn't, because organizing communication into a ledger outside financial transactions doesn't really work. And so they find something a little bit different. And then they start to think, oh my God, if every actor in the system is an agent in a network, I can start to think about, oh, well, that's going to be all these different source chains that can communicate like this. And suddenly they see this scalable solution emerge. So there are a couple of little examples of how I see things unfolding.
If anyone in the room has questions, just feel free to raise your hand. You spoke about super collaborative applications. And I think that goes to the heart of business models that we've known for the last 10 years, right? Like it's my empire, my data, and that's how I thrive. That's what my valuations are based on. Are you attacking that? And if so, what is the solution? Like, what are you proposing business models will start looking like? I've kind of put you in the spot, but what do you think business models will look like? Because I think often the word collaborative is almost an antithesis. Is that the word? To business models, right? And so how would business models begin to look? Would we go back to the days where simple revenue subscription models start making more sense, as opposed to aggregating data and owning data? Like, is it? Yeah, what do you think it looks like?
Not that smart, fortunately. I think I just try and keep it really simple. So probably the 2 best business models right now are cloud hosting and data. So firstly, how does Holochain change cloud hosting? Well, it renders Holochain transactions are free. And if you want web users to access Holochain transactions, you can host it through Holo. And then it's a distributed network of hosts. So any of us in the room choose to host. Anyone comes on Thursday, you'll see the Holo port, you plug your Holo port in, and you're paid for hosting. So what does that do? That changes, I don't know, is cloud hosting the most profitable industry in the world at the moment? Certainly it's the only industry that Amazon's worked out how to profit from, and then exactly. Okay, so we take one of the most lucrative industries in the world and we move it from with a cloud model into a distributed model. Now, if we can prove that works, of currency also that underpins what a distributed hosting economy, we're facilitating what is kind of a natural shift. And the way I've talked about it is like, we think about the cargo industry. Cargo used to be big boxes. Now cargo's pens, basically, tiny packets sent by mom and pop stores all over the world. So cargo had to shift. All the infrastructure of cargo had to shift from huge crates to tiny packages. The people in the hosting world, and we look at like a lot of the cloud hosting literature, it's fully expected that cloud hosting will move in the same way. It makes sense to move from, I had to have my server in my office, to there are a bunch of server farms or data centers, to everyone will be their own data center. The natural shift, it's a natural shift in the world because we fragment as much as is humanly possible, right? That's just a natural, to me, like a pattern of business. So what we're trying to do is build the technology that facilitates that pattern, because the technology doesn't support it at the moment. It's not people. So that's pretty big play to change one of the 2 fundamental ways you can make money in the world today. The second way with data, I don't know. I think my feeling is that there are so many shifts that will happen as we start to both host and run distributed applications, and then we start to see, well, what is value creation look like for a distributed application? I think what we can imagine is the following: just like we talk about cloud hosting as a series of companies that can provide the infrastructure costs for something that everybody needs, that eventually will be decentralized. Surely platforms, because data is really about platforms, surely platforms will also become increasingly fragmented as the dam breaks. I've got no idea what it's going to be, but it would make sense that will happen. And if that happens, then whether it's Holochain or other distributed solutions, but it will make sense that they can support a data economy that is distributed across all users, and the platform doesn't become the controlling factor in value creation. The platform facilitates value creation. So it's exactly the same thing, except that, like, I don't know, platforms like Amazon become like the hive here, where we're sitting here today. It's like, great, it's a co-working space. It's more flexible than my office. It's cheaper, but they're not taking revenue from any of the companies here. They're not extracting any other forms of value. It's space. I think platform's going to be a little bit similar. This is e-commerce. Yeah, great. Thinking of products. Yeah, warehousing, shipping, distribution. But that's not creating the value here. And me and my private network, we are creating the value. So we'll plug into this e-commerce platform just like we're going to plug into this space. That's how I can see it happening. I just can't describe any of the steps to get there.
Thanks. We have a question from you.
What really sparked my interest was the example that you gave about airliners. Because I know a few of the use cases that are currently being built and where airliners think of. So to your question on business models, I was kind of going into the direction of companies with whatever assets they're serving, be that products or be that services, that the business models are more moving away from, that's my competitor and I'm going to go compete with that guy for the largest market share, but moving more towards how can we collaborate across the assets that we have, and how can potentially competitors benefit from using some of our assets. I see, but I don't want to give away too much from my perspective, but I'm seeing that is happening. Wouldn't you believe that is the business model of the future? To focus on better utilizing the assets that are currently underutilized and increasing the collaboration among competitors?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, although that it's a kind of a static picture. You know, one of the things I'm really interested in, maybe I'll look at the economy in a couple of different layers. So I'm interested in what are the transitions for industries that were destroyed by the internet, so like media, music, etc. What can happen as you get solutions like this that can especially start to capture reputation, where people who are intimately involved in creation and production are also involved, and then especially in like networking, distribution, can be rewarded for what they're doing. So I can see a change back in value creation in content in the Holochain world. That's one. So it's like, what are the industries that were decimated by the internet and how can they be supported a little bit? Then there's the industries which have infrastructure costs that are declining, but weren't touched by the internet, as well, maybe some back office automation and all those kind of things, but fundamentally weren't disintermediated, mainly because infrastructure costs were high. So still, it's very expensive to buy a plane. So the internet coming doesn't change the fact that it's still expensive to buy a plane. So I'm really interested in those industries, but what interests me, so like aviation come third, but what interests me in those ones is what does the combination of distributed technology plus dropping infrastructure costs do? Do you get a crash like happened in media, or do you somehow support some value capture in those industries? And those ones are interesting because I think pure collaboration won't work because you get new entrants as well. Whereas in aviation, like you're talking, yeah, you get some new entrants, but new entrants seem to be, you have to have a lot of new money coming in and they generally are insolvent within a couple of years. And so you do have this, well, I don't know what we want to call it, but like cartel, oligopoly or whatever. We have entrenched players, and for them to, and it's always going to be low margin businesses generally. And for them to succeed, they need to be able to maximize the value of their assets and collaborate, as well as keeping an eye on what the competition would look like. Is it going to be infrastructure costs diminish, or is there some kind of substitution? And so that's the interesting thing I find about those industries. It's like, well, how do you both collaborate, but keep an eye on where the future is going to come? Otherwise, you're just going to lose share to those new players or a new form, maybe 5, 10, 15 years. And we'll get, so again, what's quite interesting about Holochain in that segment that you're describing is because it is purely just a framework for building distributed applications, then the social collaboration works quite well as well, in that you sit there with your partners and you design the rules of the application. You're not constrained or governed by the platform choice. You don't have to go into the same, because you can build public-private networks and a series of other things. It's not the same consideration set as proof of authority, Ethereum, or other solutions. And so you can get something that, a technology that mirrors the social process that you would have to go to create agreements between organizations that last and a map. So it's probably going into too much detail at risk if I keep following this response, but yeah, I think there's a big possibility there in building those kind of collaborations.
Thank you. Can I ask a question?
Yeah, very good. And David, just before you begin the answer, and if you could just repeat the question, because I don't think the mic's picking up the questions. So, yeah, thank you.
Sorry. I'm really intrigued by all this. I come from a wholly commercial perspective, and I saw the internet, which was all about the transference of data versus its ownership per se, basically destroy businesses because of the expectation of no cost. Now, you have to be really, really careful with that, because it's the expectation that destroyed the business, it's not the internet. And the music industry took a long time to figure out how to capture ownership, how to reward ownership, and give it to the right people. Now, we're talking decades before this thing has happened. So I'm kind of intrigued when people say, I'm going to give it to you at no cost, because it begs the question, how are you going to sustain it? Now, if you look at things like collaboration, I'm intrigued by the view that it's a goal as opposed to an outcome. So for me, if I'm looking, and I'm going to be purely mechanistic here for a second, most companies don't understand what they have, let alone what they're going to do with it. And data is a classic example. In the first instance, you have to productize data internally to understand what you're doing with it, how you benefit from it, before you can understand how you're going to monetize it externally and give it to someone and perceivably create value for them. In the absence of which, it's a fool's paradise. So I'm kind of intrigued by the fact that there's no cost here, and I believe there's always a cost. It's just a question of how you pay it and how it manifests itself. So I'm under no illusions, there is a cost somewhere. And the other thing is to do with, I'm going to partner with people once I know what I can partner with. So if we're talking about containerization and everything, that was all about the efficient movement of stuff. It had nothing to do with any other form of technology other than the practical economic movement on a ship. And that was it. That was its sole raison d'etre. That's why it existed. All the other stuff around it, like making the boat move faster or understanding what mix of product you've got on it, those are all peripheral things that drive the commercial end and make you pick and choose what fills the value of a plane or a container, for example, because it affects the profit base. So I'm sitting here and I'm thinking aloud and saying to myself, no cost, intriguing. That will affect the business models, but not in a good way that maybe these purists perceive that it will. And collaboration, whilst I'm all for it, and I understand the benefits of it, can't be a strategy in and of itself. It has to be an outcome of something that you do. Your thoughts?
David, do you want to just share what?
You seem very impassioned.
Oh, I am actually, because it affects everything that, you know, it's like, how can I put it? I mean, this blockchain thing, right? Just to be fair, it'll stop being, it'll be a success when they stop calling it blockchain. I'd say. There's no blockchain industry, there's no Oracle industry, there's no SAP industry. It's just a means to an end, right? It's a way of doing things. Some of which you may pay, some of which you may not. To varying degrees, I'm saying.
Yeah, it's a means to an end, but for some people, it's become an end to itself.
Which makes it questionable. Yes. From a commercial point of view, not from a social or
So I'm not. So I think the first thing is the internet.
David, can you summarize?
Oh, summarize. I'm hoping the question was captured. Let's summarize. Firstly, why you can't trust things that are free. Can't trust something that's free. Also, collaboration is not a collaboration is an outcome. It's not a purpose in itself. And something that's free, where's the business model? Can't trust it. And what are you really trying to build? There's always a cost. There's always something, etc. I think what we're talking about is, so one, I'm sharing a third of what we're doing, but what we're talking about is a different architecture for the internet. So that's what Holochain is. It's a framework for building interconnected networks that use the internet, but are a layer above the internet, so that anybody participating is owning what they're doing and is an empowered agent in this network. So it's basically adding an ownership layer into the internet. That's what Holochain does. Identity layer, an ownership layer. There's no need to charge for that. That would be a problem.
Yeah, because Facebook, if you don't charge, you are the product.
Yeah, I think it's.
But it's a application framework. It's a programming language by which people in the network that are built can own their identity. The identity can bridge into other networks and are owning the data that they create. I think we're mistaking what an application framework is from a platform or a business. It's a protocol to be able to run distributed applications.
I'm actually saying that in business terms and business modeling terms, anything else for content as well.
What's that, sorry?
I pay for content as well. So if I want to be able to access certain articles or magazines, Bloomberg, whatever it is, I have to pay for that.
That's not the internet. That's an application on top of it.
No, but my point is that it's something that's available. That's all I'm saying. It's something that's available. The internet is a means to that end. That's all. It's connecting.
It's a means as well. It's not an application. It's a means.
Cost angle. I'm still on that.
But if let's yeah, I'm avoiding the crosstalk because I think it gets confusing to the webinar.
I know, but the passion here.
Yeah,
So the passion. We need to capture this passion. How do we do it?
Let's go to another question, but I think the gist of what Barry is trying to say is Well, if something is free, someone is, there is no such thing as free lunch.
He's getting there. He's getting there.
No, I know that I'm going to pay for it. I know this.
And I think if I were to speak on behalf of David, which I'm sure that he's kind of trying to say from different angles, is you have to feel to architect any business model you wish. This does not mean that it's not a business model.
See, it's not so much that I don't believe David or trust him or anything like that. It's the corporate player I've got to convert and get him to work on it.
Solomon, your question.
Yeah, actually, I want to go a bit deeper, right? Because you said that transaction processing of the bandwidth and the processing of the transaction, which there is a cost to it, right? So, So my question is that the transaction fee is free from the perspective of the web user, or the transaction fee is free from the application provider. And I also know that the user got two types of users. One is a node who is also a user, and if you are a node, you are by extension a host as well, right? And I'm sure the host get paid by the application provider. And then at the same time, the node who is a host will also serve the web user. So are you saying that the transaction fee is free for the web user, but actually is that somehow is the application provider provide a service that the web user pays the application provider directly, and then the application provider use part of the revenue to pay the host to go and host the application to serve the web user. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, it's way too complicated.
Because it's actually okay. We don't talk about node host. We just talk about pure web user, right? So it's the host that is processing the transaction and serving it to the web user, right? But the web user, for the application to be sustainable, the web user needs to pay to the application, right? It cannot be the web user don't pay the host, and also the web user don't pay the application provider. It must have a business model that the user pays the provider and provider pay the host. So let me clarify that.
Correct.
I love the answer. Yeah. Right. Then also another question is that
Can I explain something though? Because I think that would help a little bit. So when we're getting this debate in terms of like what's free, etc. If we go back to one of the business models that works well today is the cloud hosting model. So we all get that sense. Most applications are hosted by Amazon Web Services and Microsoft Azure or something. We're used to the idea that someone's running an application, we want to use it, we make requests, and we know that Twitter or whichever other company, they are paying to have their application hosted so that we can use them. I think we're all used to that. Now, we don't pay as users, but we're used to the fact that these companies pay. And then when we look at their profit and loss statement, we know they pay quite a lot of money. And Holochain is just saying, okay, if you have a transaction between two Holochain nodes in a Holochain application, then because each of those nodes is running Holochain, right, Holochain conductor, has whether at that moment or later on an internet connection, so they're paying for internet. There's no additional cost to that transaction because there's no network that needs to be built to support that transaction. It's a peer-to-peer transaction between two nodes that are running the right software in the right infrastructure. Speaking the same language. Just like we're talking today, no one is charging us to communicate right here. But all this infrastructure is being provided so we can communicate. So this is just a pattern of communication that's now possible. But if we want to use the web, we don't want to run Holochain. We want to use the web, just like we do today. Of course, we pay. Because to be able to use any application, you don't have a copy of that application and all the relevant records on your device. You just want to use it. So you have to pay somebody to be able to make the query and provide the query. It's just that in the Holo world, that's distributed hosting. That's people around the world plugging in hosting boxes or small data centers plugging in. That's not going into a centralized data center. But Holo, what we've designed is this hosting business to say that not everyone, in fact, not everyone, very few people are going to want to run Holochain at the start. Hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands. People are going to want to interact with the distributed web exactly like they interact with the web today. Just want to be able to look at a website on your phone or run an app. And so we know that to be able to show the strength of Holochain, as in the strength of the distributed web, you need to do something that's super easy for everyone. So you build a distributed hosting company. You charge 1% transaction fees. Build a microtransaction currency, because to answer Solomon's question, when the app provider, a web user, makes a query of an application, that needs to get routed to the relevant host or hosts. Those hosts need to be paid. Those hosts serve the application to the end user. That sounds super easy, but nobody has ever worked out how to do distributed hosting at scale, because the networking and then the microtransaction component to it are unbelievably complex.
So that kind of brings us into something we wanted to talk about in this conversation, which is mutual credit and the currency system that you said Holo, the hosting infrastructure, runs on. Could you share a bit about that and just bring that in?
Thanks very much for coming.
So many events, right?
The simplest way to think about this currency is, and for those of you who are familiar with cryptocurrencies, they've all been built on a model that says, okay, let's not complicate governance. Let's fix our supply. Let's fix our mechanisms for distributing supply. And let's pray that we constrain the available supply. Let's pray that demand increases. Let's pray that then we bring new money in and everybody makes money. And eventually, if they make enough money, you spend the currency into existence and it has some kind of meaning or some kind of value. In a mutual credit system, you can look at it a little bit differently. You look at it like sharing economy application. And we just say, okay, in this environment, so instead of using price to be able to settle supply and demand, in sharing economy currency or mutual credit currency, demand increase. Also, you have a net zero. So there's demand, you have price relatively fixed, and then supply exists to meet the demand. So there's demand for hosting. Hosting is provided. If you have too many hosts, then, well, you're probably going to start dropping the prices a little bit until some of the hosts leave the network, and then there's a right amount of hosts. If you have not enough hosts, price will increase a little bit, like Uber surge pricing. New hosts will come on, or existing hosts will provide more hosting. You'll have an equilibrium again, surge pricing will drop. But in this world, you just use supply to meet the changes in demand and use price as a little bit indicator to support that. So it's just productive economy currency design. It's just incredibly complicated because productive economy is also driven by credit. So you have to then design algorithmic credit to be able to incentivize, because hosts are generally they'll be providing hosting on credit before they're paid. You have to be able to design that. And you have to be able to get around all of the governance constraints and the technical design of a dynamic supply currency. But it's the only thing that can support productive economies. Fixed supply isn't designed for a productive economy unless you get really lucky.
Is there a trend that you're seeing in terms of more and more apps and businesses moving towards mutual credit as opposed to traditional equity or crypto models? Are you seeing more Holo applications and businesses gravitate towards mutual credit? Or
have to go live first.
Sorry?
Have to go live with that.
Yeah, no. When you're seeing, is there the recommendation that you're making as David or as Hollow, or are you saying it's contextual?
I think like I speak to lots of businesses about it. My feeling is there's been at least 10,000 cryptocurrencies launched in the last 5 years. And how many would say successful? Maybe say like a couple of hundred.
Yeah.
If that. So let's say 100. Let's say the top 100 have some form of success, right? That's a pretty bad strike rate. But because it's a bit like creating content on YouTube. Take all the barriers to entry out and you get a lot of crap, right? And then the world becomes, how do you navigate through it to create value and create meaning? And fixed supply currency design is exactly that. No inherent value. They said it's value in scarcity. That's scarcity of what?
Yeah.
Mostly in fixed supply design, as I said, there's 3 things that you need to think about, and very few people think about them. You need to support your supply, you support with demand, and you need to know how new money works in your system. You fundraise in a fixed supply environment, you've already got a whole bunch of money in that needs to exit at the first available opportunity. So you're already making a big liability for your business. You watch the price change, and price has to change in a fixed supply environment because price is the thing that flexes here. And you you constrain your economy both ways. Price increases, purchasing power has increased, business doesn't have cash in the bank, business is dead. Price decreases, community's angry, community wants to take their cash out, no new money comes in, business is dead. It's very, very rare to get this dynamic right. And again, and so there's a whole bunch of, mathematical modeling and all these kind of things. But the fundamentals, it's tricky.
Economics define price as an outcome based on supply and based on velocity. So you're not actually determining the price, you're tweaking the supply and you're tweaking the velocity at which it moves. And then that will determine the price, assuming there's utility. Right?
Exactly.
Assuming there's utility. And most of the things, the 1800 or whatever you're talking about, however many were out there, should never have hit the market. They never should have hit the market. And you're right, percolating through all that bloody noise.
Yeah, and so the variable supply design isn't inherently good.
Yeah.
And you're still going to get bad economies. But the thing we need to teach people to think about is to see the currency move over time. It's hard for people to get a picture of how to design something that starts before there's any activity on the network or the business whatsoever, works through fundraising or no fundraising, works in those early stages where you're having your first transaction, works as you scale and grow, works as you get to a steady state. So it's very easy to say, okay, price times velocity is a function, this is how it works, which it can all make sense when you've got a healthy economy or an unhealthy economy where you've got movement. But in a lot of these projects, they've designed for fundraising, and then the fundraising model has broken the first transactions. And it's just how you can hide the death for as long as possible. And there's other projects like protocols are the worst, or platform protocols are the worst, because you get to this point, they launch, or there's hype, launch, fundraise, and then they get to mainnet, maybe they boost to mainnet, and then you're at mainnet. And what do? You've got no more moon.
Yeah.
The only way is if you tracked a whole bunch of transactions onto your network. But even then, watch the fight for transactions. The fight for transactions is a race to zero, because there's no inherent value in a blockchain network providing transactions. It's all going to go to zero. Why would there be any value in it? People will come up with more effective ways to secure the network. So all of these platform protocol businesses they thought they were going to hit that moon at mainnet, disappears. There's nowhere to go.
Any more questions in the room? Because we're running out on our time. Yeah, go We're going to continue our conversation.
We're going to continue our conversation informally here in the room, and that's for the privileged few who were in Singapore and could join us. But for those who joined us on the live stream, thanks a lot. We're going to share a little recorded version of this. Special thanks to Shruti of Blockchain Center and Randeep for setting this up on really short notice. And of course, thanks to David for coming in here straight from the airport. We're not sure what time zone he's on. I don't think he is either. But appreciate him sharing his thoughts with us here. Yeah, so thanks a lot for those tuning in. I know some of you have joined in all the way from New Zealand, so I'm guessing it's pretty late where you guys are, but thanks a lot. Bye.